Are also being blamed for the uproar over this story, with one writer suggesting that the industry may need to do some serious soul searching in the wake of what we've seen written about this case. New York Post staffer Seth Mandel was referring to what he called the string of fake pro-Trump hate crimes, you know, where people say that Trump supporters went out there to beat down Trump non-supporters, saying that those are now giving way to monstrous, real anti-Trump hate crimes. The Washington Post columnist Callum Borcher is now taking some heat for framing the story as the convergence of what he called pro-Trump narratives. And one panelist on MSNBC seemed to be suggesting that these suspects were too stupid to be criminals.
Well, I mean, you look at it on the surface, you think, you know, kids can make some really poor decisions from time to time. But because they made so many errors here, if they were truly trying to be criminal, to obviously broadcast your crime is not a smart thing to do.
Katie Pavlich is a Fox News contributor and townhall.com news editor, and Julie Roginski is also a Fox News contributor and a Democratic analyst. Good to see you both.
Great to see you. Hi,
Megan. Let me just start with Callum Borcher, who's, I think he's actually usually great in the Washington Post. This one he's taken a lot of heat for because he's suggesting that if the attackers had been white and the victim had been black, that the incident would have conjured America's ugly history of white mobs committing violence against black people. But there's no parallel history of the reverse happening on anything remotely approaching the same scale. And so people feel that he was diminishing the seriousness here and that this could be more easily dismissed and not put into a greater narrative given this country's history. Your thoughts on it, Katie?
Well, it does diminish the horrible situation at hand, and it goes and plays into the narrative that a lot of people in the liberal media, leftists, believe that hate crimes can only be committed by white people against minorities, which obviously is not the case in this situation. For him to say that this is pro-Trump narratives wrapped up in a horrible incident, when in this video they're specifically talking about being anti-Trump, saying that, you know, very racist, anti-white things to this mentally disabled young man, doesn't add up with the facts, and it just feeds the narrative that they actually do believe that hate crimes can only be committed by white people, which is not true.
Callum's talking about, he says a Huffington Post survey conducted in November shows 45% of Trump voters believe white people face a lot of discrimination. Just 22% of Trump voters said the same about black people facing a lot of discrimination. And he feels that this worldview of many Trump voters is not supported by the data, but now they can find support in this one awful video.
You know, I don't want to diminish or feed into a larger narrative about this video from either the right or the left. What happened to me, I'm not a lawyer certainly, and I thought your previous segment laid out the controversies to whether this is or is not a hate crime. To me, from a human perspective, it is a hate crime for the many reasons that people have outlined in covering the story. And so let's not diminish by saying, as Katie did, leftists or anybody else, I am from the left, I am as liberal as it gets. But on this particular issue, to me, this is a hate crime. And it's a hate crime when somebody's saying the horrible things that they said with racial overtones. Apparently, there were chants of go vote Trump or
the question is whether the media would be reacting differently to the tape, Katie, if the races of the assailants and the victim were reversed. Having said that, there has been a lot of coverage of this, but the critics claim not as much as it would have been otherwise.
Well, they're not as much as it would have been otherwise. And let's go back to the beginning of when this story broke. Okay, so after the election, BuzzFeed ran this story of 28 alleged hate crimes in the post-Trump election era with very little evidence, very few police reports filed as a result of these hate crimes of pro-Trump supporters against people who maybe voted for Hillary Clinton. And yet here we are today, and the original story from the AP didn't mention the races of the attacker, the alleged attackers, or the victim, and that certainly wouldn't have been the case. And it does feed into this narrative that white supremacy is prevalent in America, that we've heard over the past six months to a year, that only white people can commit hate crimes against minorities. It can never be the reverse. And so it certainly would have been painted differently. And I doubt that we would have seen headlines like, oh, this situation that we've seen play out on Facebook, this horrific crime, is just a compilation of anti-Hillary Clinton sentiment. I mean, come on.
Go ahead, Julia. Give your last word.
I mean, this whole woe is me. The New York Times mentioned the race of these assailants. Every mainstream media outlet that I've read that has covered
Why would
this
the
has
AP
mentioned
omit
that.
Initially.
I don't know why the AP would do it. I'm telling you, I read the New York Times every day, and they mentioned it, and that's as mainstream as it gets. Look, don't try to somehow politicize this or make this some sort of woe is me conservatives issue. This, from every spectrum, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, we all agree this is an awful crime. I think it's a hate crime, maybe not legally, but morally, certainly it's a hate crime. The races have been mentioned tremendously. I just don't like the narrative of suddenly saying this is somehow woe is me, white people are getting oppressed, when this has nothing to do with it. It's an awful crime. Let's not diminish it by politicizing it.
Well, you could argue that the assailants politicized it with a reference to Donald
That's true.
Trump. But I mean,
Absolutely
that's what got people
but we should
start
not.
talking about. All right, guys, great to see you both. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan.